Welcome, everybody, to the Build a Vibrant Culture podcast. My name is Nicole Greer, and they call me the Vibrant Coach. And I am here with another amazing, vibrant guest. Traci Chernoff is the creator and host of the globally acclaimed podcast, Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources. And we're going to ask her what that means. And she is the dedicated career coach offering expert services in resume writing, design and editing, interview skills preparation, career coaching, and LinkedIn curation. So we're going to get all the downloads from her today. You're going to have all the takeaways. Get your pen and pencil ready. Her passion for HR and career coaching ignited in college, where she assisted friends and family with their resumes and interview preparations with a business and administration and English rhetoric from Binghamton. Did I say it right? University and a master's in public administration from Rutgers University, Traci embarked on a dynamic HR career. Over the past decade, she has held pivotal HR leadership roles in both big box and luxury retail sectors, driving strategic initiatives, managing employee relations, talent planning, and core HR processes across North America. And she started at the Target. We're going to talk about the Target. Transitioning from retail, Traci took on a senior leadership role in the tech workforce management software industry, supporting teams across North America, EMEA, and India. On her podcast, Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources, Traci aims to revolutionize HR by aligning employee demands with business needs and dismantling the misconceptions and stigmas that often cloud the HR field. Her mission is to empower and educate her audience, ensuring that they leave with newfound confidence and knowledge and insight. Through her podcast and career coaching, Traci provides invaluable perspectives on HR, and we're going to get some of those today, offers strategic guidance on HR processes, and assists clients in navigating their career paths with clarity and confidence. My word, I am so glad you're here. You're like a genius. All things HR.
Well, when I hear you read my bio, I'm like, who's she talking about? I'm like, that's me. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that is me, I guess. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and if you're watching on YouTube, you're like, she looks like she's like 14. What in the world?
Thank you.
Yeah, and one of the most important things that's not even in her bio is like she's the mama to twins. Isn't that
It's true.
amazing? Does all
Thank
this and has two
you.
8-month-olds.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really sometimes when you hear someone tell you about yourself in a way, I realize that's my bio. I certainly had a hand in writing that. I did write it. But when I think about that, it's like wild when I look back on my career and also now, being a mom, being a wife, like it's just so crazy. I'm super
Yeah.
grateful. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, blessed woman for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so everybody, we know what let me just tell you something real quick before we talk about bringing the human back to human resources. I
Hmm.
was speaking down in Melbourne, Florida at a SHRM meeting. And this, after I spoke, this gentleman came up and he was very kind and he was like, "Oh, I loved your talk," and all that good stuff that us fellow speakers say to each other.
Hmm.
And he said, "Next month I'm presenting here." And I said, "Oh, that's fantastic. What are you going to present on?" And he said, "I'm going to present on this article called Why We Hate HR." Have you heard about this?
No, I'm gonna have to look this up.
Okay, so there was this article that said why we hate HR. He was going to talk about do we still hate HR, but he's going to talk to all the HR professionals.
I
So
love that. That's hilarious.
I got the article, and when I read it, I was just kind of like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe the people who are sour and upset about everything in life might hate HR, but I think the average bear understands that there's a beautiful human like Traci trying to do her best in the HR department, or Nicole Greer, right?
Thank you. Right. Right. It's true. I mean, it's funny because everyone always says you're not always going to be able to please everyone. So this we know. But HR, it's just a very funny thing because the HR space, let's say, it doesn't even matter what industry you're in within HR, there's just a stigma. I know we're going to talk about this, but it's one of the main reasons why I created my podcast because there is such a lack of understanding and there's a lack of appreciation that HR is basically just a term for a bunch of people who have a function in a business, just like finance, just like business development, just like sales, right? Like, what is really the difference other than HR truly being kind of the middle person between the employee demands and the business needs. So that obviously is a major difference. I don't think that there are many other players within business or within organizations that have that type of role, but there are a lot of stigmas. And I read on Reddit and Facebook groups and Instagram all the time where people say that they express a lot of contention when it comes to HR and their HR partners. So there's a lot to
Yeah,
break down there.
absolutely. Well, let's start with kind of your slogan, or your tagline, which is bringing the
hmm
human back to human resources. So, what do you actually mean by that? How are you bringing the human back?
I
Yeah.
appreciate you asking this. So I think it's helpful to take you back in time and to help your listeners to envision this time. So it was 2020. We all
Mhm.
know what happened then. And, many of us had pretty much, gone fully remote. I was fully remote and I'd just finished my master's and I was like, okay, now what? I don't know what to do with all of my time. And I had always wanted to start a podcast. And I remember saying to my husband, like, I really want to start something. I don't know what I'm going to talk about. He was like, just buy the mic and you'll figure it out. I'm like, okay, great. That's the advice I would give him if he were in this,
Right.
conundrum. And so I bought the mic, and I kid you not, the mic, I get an email from Target saying that the mic had been, in process to be delivered. And I was like, oh, crap. I have to come up with a topic. And I was scrolling on LinkedIn like so many of us do, and I saw so many people, unfortunately, a lot of people in HR who were expressing opinions that I vehemently disagreed with around really like people and business, especially in the context of COVID. And everything was so focused on this very vague kind of approach to people, and also this almost like numeric representation of people. Like everything was about numbers, was about the bottom line or the top line. It was hard for me to find thought leaders on LinkedIn who were really talking about the people in these businesses who were being affected by COVID, whether that's, someone in the healthcare industry who was
Mm,
directly affected
yeah.
in a very specific way, or someone outside of healthcare. And at the time I was working in retail, and I had, my job had completely changed because now I'm managing employee health, which is not something I had ever done. So that's the context of all of this. And by the time I received my mic, I was like, aha, light bulb moment. This is what I can talk about. I feel so passionately about really helping leaders to see who they're talking about. Fine, you want to talk about how there's a specific trend, or there's, with COVID, there are 10% of people are being laid off per organization. I'm just throwing out a random example. Well, what does 10% really mean? Those are people, those are human beings. And what does it mean for them now that they don't have a job, or that they were laid off in a way that isn't really emblematic of an organization's values, right? So all of this was the context, the historical context, I'll say. And so I decided that there was a real problem to solve. And the problem was really this lack of humanity, not even a lack of empathy, but really a lack of humanity and understanding behind what our jobs truly are within HR. And so from that, I was like, okay, well, it's called human resources. So I'm going to bring the human back. And I was like, aha, bringing the human back to human resources. It's really literally that. Like, we're called human resources, fine. Some people are called people operations. The company that I work for, we do call ourselves people operations. It doesn't matter. We're bringing the human, we're bringing the people, we're bringing the audience, the subject that we are meant to provide support to, other than the business that we work for. We're bringing them back to the forefront and back to the root of what it is that we do. So that's kind of in a nutshell the long story behind where bringing the human back to
Yeah.
human resources
Well,
came from.
one thing that I say all the time when I'm teaching HR classes and things like that, I teach for the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Hey, shout out to all the Niners out there. So here's the thing is I'm teaching all these folks that want to get into HR, and open up my class. I'm curious what you think about this, Tracy, as I say, uh, so imagine your building, or imagine all your people working remotely in their kitchens, at the dining room table, wherever they are. And all of a sudden, the aliens upload them in a starship and take your employees to Mars, what's going to get done today at work? And people are like, nothing. And I'm like, exactly.
Uh,
That's exactly my point. I mean, you need humans to
I
run a
love that.
business. And so you could have the
Hmm.
most whiz bang product in the world, but you got to have somebody to work with that product or service. So is that what you mean as well about the human?
Yes, well, it's so funny that you mentioned this because recently I was speaking with someone, not in HR, about how important that is. And really specifically, we were talking about how it's very easy for decision makers, whether that's someone at the C suite or someone in HR, to easily forget their audience. Just because when you're in the moment of making a decision or trying to solve a problem, you're not necessarily always keeping in mind who your audience is. One of my really firm mantras is meet people
Hmm.
where they are. And I say that because when you really think about it and you have a decision maker who isn't keeping their audience in mind, are you really doing that? Are you really meeting your people where they are? Like in the scope of my experience, before I worked in tech, I worked in retail and luxury retail. And my audience, they were hourly employees most of the time, like nine times
Right.
90%, I would say, 60 to 90 if we're being super fair. Yeah. So when we think about that, it's like, okay, the hourly employees have really, really specific nuances to their jobs and specific challenges that someone who isn't hourly doesn't necessarily understand, or someone who hasn't worked an hourly job doesn't understand for sure. And so when you even think about the challenge behind like pay or access to pay or earned wage access, which is totally a topic for another time, I'm sure. Um, when businesses really think about the problems that they're solving for, if they're not thinking through that lens of who the audience is and who the recipient of that information or that solution is going to be, they're totally going to miss the mark. So I guess coming back to this point that you're making, it's like the sooner business leaders in or outside of HR can really understand and see that we're talking about people. Like, for another example here, is that anytime someone references percentages, whether it's in the work that I do or a client or anyone that I'm speaking to about this type of topic, I'm always eager to say, okay, well, what does that truly represent? Because if someone says, oh, well, 10% of our organization isn't meeting expectations, well, what does that mean? And of that 10%, how many people are actively being coached or
Oh,
given
amen. Can we
feedback
get
by
an
their
amen,
leaders or going
everybody?
through, right? Amen. So it's like, I just imagine that's what the listeners
Right.
are saying. Amen. So, if you think about that, if you have an organization of 100 people, 10% is 10 people. So you're not talking about percentages. You're talking about 10 human beings who may or may not have had the opportunity to improve their performance. So it's like, okay, well, of the 10 people, if 10% of them have received coaching and feedback, that's one person,
Right. Right.
right? If
10%
I'm
of
doing the math
10%. That's right.
correctly. I
That's
never
one
claim to be.
out of 100. Right.
Right, exactly. So, I should clarify, I've never claimed to be a mathematician here, but that's, if I think about all the purses that I've bought on sale, that's, 10%, I could do that quickly, but that's what we're talking about here is, you know, truly individuals. So I think that at the end of the day, organizations are better suited for really having a pulse on who their people are, thinking about who they're impacting, and then also when they do talk about numbers, because it's inevitable, especially the larger the organization, the more you're kind of summing people up into these percentages or, number formats. There has to be some anecdotal approach so that we're not losing the humanity in our
Yeah,
decision making.
absolutely. And so I just want to say a couple of things about all that because there were lots of nuggets in there. When you're throwing around your percents, remember that percents are people and figure out how many people you're talking about. And then her powerful question right there was, what does that truly represent? And and I will tell you, I don't know how you feel about this, but I have this radical belief. So let's see how this flies. But I'm not a
Mhm.
big believer in employee engagement surveys. I think they create a lot of trouble.
Interesting.
And my whole thing is stop surveying and start engaging. I think one of the big problems with bringing back the human to human resources is, most companies say it's 100 people, they're going to probably have one human resource person, maybe two if they are
Mhm.
lucky as all
Mhm.
day long, right? There's no way one person in human resources can engage those 100 people. So it's almost like I think like anybody who has a direct report is on the human resources team. That's how I look at it. So if
Mhm.
I'm a manager and I have three
Mhm.
people, I'm on the human resources team. Now I collaborate with Tracy, but I am dealing with my human resources and I engage with them. And I love what you said. How many of them are getting coaching or feedback? And I think a great manager
Mhm.
is great at giving feedback and great at letting people know how they're doing and giving them the tools to do better. I mean, that's what employee engagement is to me.
Mhm.
So I'm loving everything that you're saying there. Their performance, managing their performance. That's the key. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I Managers have a really hard job. Not only do they have the jobs that they do, but they also have the job
Right,
of managing people and leading people and coaching, and that is a totally separate job on
right,
top of the job that they have. It's not to say that managers should say that they're doing two jobs, because that's the job of a manager, is to do your own job and
right.
manage or lead people, but it's really difficult. And the thing that I'll say too is I totally agree that anyone that is a people leader has a great deal of responsibility on their shoulders. And there's that, I think, same or similar pressure on HR teams to make sure that their leaders are equipped with the tools that they need in order to be highly successful people leaders. Not every manager, as we know, is going to be great. Not every manager, as we know, is going to be terrible. But there is that, added pressure on HR teams and, I would say, senior leadership teams to really, really provide the tools and the training that leaders need in order to be the best they can be. To get the same way we're talking about how many bottom performers are being coached or given feedback on a regular basis. It's really the same thing. Because even if someone is really great at what they do, one can't assume that they have the training and the tools that they need to do even better or to lead a team. And on your hot take around the engagement surveys, the one thing that I'll say, because I don't totally disagree, I think two things can be true at once, where you can have surveys and you can engage, and they're not like
Right.
mutually
I agree with that.
exclusive. But I do think I do see, look at us aligning. I love it. Not that it's a requirement, I know, for being on your podcast, because we could totally disagree and and sometimes that's great too when you disagree with others in your same industry. But anyway, I digress. My point here is that um, the one thing that I think surveys do that potentially benefits an organization is that they provide talking points for leaders that might be on the side of the spectrum where they deny that things are in need of improvement. So, like, surveys do kind of take away the um, subjectivity that comes from, like, an HR leader having all of this feedback and saying, "Hey, this is what I'm hearing," because certainly I'm sure you and I have both worked with folks who have argued that the feedback isn't, accurate, or that there is nothing to change. But surveys you can't really argue with, because the people taking those surveys are the members of the team. So I think that's the one thing that I would say is a positive caveat to having surveys. But I do think that I should say, I know that you can't have surveys without the engagement portion, because if you're just surveying and you do nothing to engage with the team, you do nothing to affect change from that feedback, people are just going to stop taking your survey. What does it all
That's
mean? It
exactly
means
right.
nothing
And that's what I see
otherwise.
a lot of the time. There's that, and then
Mhm. Mhm.
there's like denial and the ostrich's head in the sand moment where, like, and then I think a lot of times we throw out a survey and we're not careful about wording or have a like a preamble to this survey, like here's what
Mm.
we're going to do,
Mhm.
because there's certain things people are going to ask for and we're not going to be able to give it to them, because I love what you say in your intro that I read in your bio. Is you said, hold on, let me find it right here because it's really good, because this is really what HR is supposed to be a partner, right? And you said aligning employee demands with business needs. Right. So, the thing
Mhm.
that we need to remember is like employees are there to help make the business grow. That's how that works, right? But
Yeah,
then the employees need stuff to make the business grow, and they need stuff personally
that's right.
so that they can bring themselves to the work fully. And so I think it's, if you have a survey, maybe even take right out of Traci Chernoff's bio, that little line right there. This is what we're trying to do with this survey. We can't give you everything. Like, not everybody
Right.
can get, like, you get a new car and you get a new car. you know,
Right.
we're not going to.
Right. I know, we could Oprah Winfrey the whole process. It's really a very good point too, and something that I've learned just this year from working with my leader who's been my leader now for a year is that the questions that you ask in a survey are also really important, because if you ask questions that regardless of the answers, you can't solve for, doesn't even matter whether it's like an easy solution or a difficult solution. If you can't reasonably solve for it,
Right.
why are you asking? And I was like, huh, that's a great point. And so these are things that, I've learned this year, that there's really a very clear strategy to surveying. And it doesn't mean that you have to survey, and doesn't mean that you don't have to survey, but when you do, you have to do it in a meaningful and highly
100%.
strategic way so that you're not kind of
Right.
shooting yourself in the
Oh, I
foot
couldn't
in the
agree
process.
more. Yeah, because that's what I see. A lot of limping HR people who have shot themselves in the foot. So
Yeah.
we don't want
That's
that.
awesome.
Yeah. So
That's
let's
hilarious.
dig in a little
Yeah,
bit
right.
to that. Where you say aligning employee demands, like that word demand might set off some leaders. What demands?
Mhm.
Align employee
Mhm.
demands with the
Mhm.
business needs. So can you give us an example of what you're talking about right there? How do we be better at that? So let's get a basic understanding of that.
Yeah, I mean, a perfect example is, I think, even if we think about the hourly workforce, because 60% of the American workforce do work on an hourly basis and earn an income on an hourly basis. So if we take then that statistic, then potentially something around 40 to 60% of your listeners might be earning an income on an hourly basis. So that said, I think a perfect example is, if an employee really needs flexibility. Hourly employees are often the ones who really pay the price and don't have the flexibility. They're often frontline workers. If we even think about retail, again, a cashier, someone stocking the shelves, someone unloading the trucks of shipment, they're working on an hourly basis, and flexibility is not something that typically is awarded to them. But why not? Why can't hourly employees have the same flexibility that you and I have, where we're able to work remotely? You and I are doing your podcast remotely, right? We're recording from, you're in North Carolina and I'm in New York, and it's working out. Why can an hourly employee have that same level of flexibility within the scope of what they do? So within the scope of what they do, flexibility could look like being able to swap shifts without manager oversight, and just having some approval. It could be employees being able to have access to their earned wages. I kind of mentioned this before. Earned wage access to me is a really important piece of flexibility, and then the current and future frontier for hourly employees. And so when we understand that demands are really expectations, like you and I are not going to work for free, right? That's it. When we say, hey, this is what I charge you, client X, or, this is what my salary is when I join a company full time, that's a demand. And either a company is willing to pay that salary or they're not. When we understand that those expectations, like flexibility for an hourly employee, are totally reasonable, like it's totally reasonable to expect that a company pays you, for example, again, coming back to this, fundamental demand that you and I have to get
Right.
paid, or that
Right.
anyone has to get paid, right? Then we can understand, okay, well, where can the business then meet some of those demands? It's not to say that businesses should meet every single employee demand. That would be
Right. And not
insane.
viable or
But
fiscally
things like
responsible.
right, Right, exactly, exactly. So don't meet every demand. But when we think about flexibility or earned wage access, businesses should be trying a little bit harder to meet those demands because they're reasonable. So again, with this example of being able to swap a shift or take on more shifts outside of what they've been scheduled, businesses need more coverage. And when you think about it, again, I'm a retailer by by trade, really, and when I think about what businesses always need, what retailers always need, it's more coverage, more availability, more hands, right? And that means that now you have this employee demand for flexibility and you have the business need for more coverage, and you're able to find harmony between those two things. And I try to help folks see that it doesn't have to be this feeling of compromise or sacrifice. It's actually a matter of figuring out, okay, what is the employee going to benefit from? How can we make their experience better just by understanding their demands and hearing their demands? And is there anything that we can actually do about it? And most of the time, there is something that a company can do about it so that their business needs are met and the employee demands are met. And now you have this like heart harmony, everyone's, peace and love, and it's great. And people
Yeah,
are really
yeah, I
engaged.
agree. Yeah, it's kind of like, hear me out. This is what I need. Yeah, I
Yeah,
love that. Yeah. So,
exactly.
some folks are probably listening going, earned wage access. Explain.
Yes, yes. So earned wage access fundamentally is the ability for really hourly employees, but let's just say employees generally, to be able to access the wages that they've already earned. If you take again, a retail employee here, let's say they've already worked 10 hours in their week and they have another 15 to go, but they have a bill that's due today. Earned wage access provides them the flexibility to be able to effectively like cash out those 10 hours that they've already worked. They already did the work. They did the job. They
Right.
earned those 10 hours. And so earned wage access provides them that really like physical capability of being able to retrieve and receive those funds. And then that's the pinnacle of flexibility for an hourly employee. And this is, in the work that I do, quote unquote, my day job, where I work as a senior director of employee engagement. I work for a tech company and workforce management software. So this is something that we provide our clients as a solution. Earned wage access is one of the many products that we have. And I fundamentally believe in it. It's when I think about my own experience as an hourly employee, I don't know if you've ever worked in
Oh,
retail or
girl,
in an
I've
hourly
done it
role.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah, retail,
Same,
restaurant
same,
business, all of those
right?
frontline things.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so if you think about that, like let's say you were, back in school and you had already, maybe it was actually your summer vacation. You were working as many hours as you could so that you could, and maybe, and like me, so that you could have some extra
I need
cash
new
so that you could go
shoes
into
and
the fall
books.
semester, right? Yeah, right, right, and books and shoes and books and shoes and maybe some beer money if
Right.
that's what you like. Maybe you're taking 30 hours that week and you have an event or a party that you want to go to and you've already worked 20 hours. You're able to receive that 20 hours of pay that you've already worked, and you don't have to wait for your next pay period. And that is, again, the pinnacle of flexibility to me. And it's very hard, I think, for me to hear a viable argument against it from a business. Like, why wouldn't a business want their employees to have that type of flexibility? Customers of ours, for example, like, we work with them within their payroll or HRS systems, and as long as you have the logistics figured out, I would really love to hear how a company would defend against having that, because there really isn't an argument against it, because ultimately like when you have a more engaged population, uh, you know businesses are going to be more productive, customers are going to be happier, and we know, to your example around, if aliens come and abduct all of our employees, like the business is not going to move if a business cannot keep their employees happy and everyone leaves or is abducted by
That's
aliens. It
exactly
just
right.
won't happen. So
Yeah,
keep
and
your
I
employees
think
happy.
the only argument people could come up with would be like if you were in a cash flow problem. That would be the only reason.
Well,
But if you had, a couple of bank rolls of payroll sitting in the bank and you could do the money part of it, this would be no issue at all.
yeah, and I suppose if a company has a cash flow issue, they're a much bigger fish to fry than
100
employee
Yeah,
flexibility
100%.
at that point.
So I love that. Well, you said you have many products. I don't want to turn this into a commercial, but what are some other flexibility or products or things that HR professionals could do to meet, the employee demands, and then at the same time get people revved up about loving working there? Because here's what I know. Here's what I know. Here's another
Yeah.
thing, everybody. If people love where they work, they typically work harder. Typically is the key
Mhm.
word
That's
there,
true.
but typically work harder. I mean, there's been places where I've loved working and I gave it my all. And if I didn't enjoy working there, I
Mhm.
was typically getting my resume together and answering job placement ads. But
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
so I think that
Right.
people, if they have flexibility with their earned wage access, they're pretty jammed up about things, they're going to do well. So what other things could we
Mhm.
do to meet employee
Mhm.
demands?
Oh, it's a great question. I mean, when you think about the people, again, like if we come back to them, if the hourly employees have demands and they're the majority of a business, what about the managers? Like, how are we understanding their needs and their demands? And managers, again, are so often tasked with this like really, really difficult job of doing their own jobs and managing people. And so, to me, one of the best things that a company can do is think about how they can help them to be more productive and really save them time. The company that I work for is Legion Technologies. So, one of the things that we also offer is scheduling automation, which is backed by intelligent automation and AI. And so, through that, there are demand drivers that businesses just innately have, right? Again, if you think about retail, there's traffic, there's sales per hour, there's all of these data points that businesses like ours and workforce management softwares like ours can take and really help to create ideal schedules through automation. So then managers are actually not spending that time scheduling their employees or managing swap shifts or managing, calls in and out. They're effectively having all of that time saved and then they can reinvest that time to do other things. And so I can tell you, I mean, I used to work at Target as an in store HR manager, and I spent hours, hours, and hours of my time on scheduling. And through that, I also had to work with the department managers on their schedules. And so when I add up the amount of time that I spent plus the amount of time that they spent, it was egregious. And so, ultimately I came to the company that I work for now, Legion Technologies, because I was a customer of Legion's first. After leaving Target, I worked for a luxury
Okay.
fashion company called
Yes.
Sandro
So
and
how many
Maj.
handbags do you have?
Yeah,
Let's just get a count. Okay. All
a,
right.
a
She doesn't
lot.
want to tell. All right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
A lot. I would say maybe over 15. But I have to say I'm very scrupulous. Like I don't just buy. I like to make sure that what I'm buying is either an investment or something I really, 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 really want. So, but it's really the better question is how many
Okay.
shoes do I
Well,
have?
they're putting
So
on an addition
that's
at
a
her
number I
house for
can't
the
even tell you. I
children,
don't
for
even
the
know.
twins and the shoes.
Yeah, right,
Okay.
right, right. For the twins, right, exactly. My husband just doesn't know it yet. But all of this to say that when I was, working in luxury retail, we had these problems. We had managers who were wasting their time on scheduling, and we had employees who didn't have the flexibility that they needed. And so I found the company that I work for now, Legion Technologies, and we effectively signed with them, became a customer. And I can tell you just from my own experience that in this rollout, managers went from spending 10 hours a week on scheduling end to end and then to then saving 7 hours. So they spent, instead of 10 hours, they spent 3 hours on scheduling. So that 7 hours went back into
Right. Which
coaching
is
their
what we
team,
want.
spending time with customers, which is what we want. And employees want that too. They want to feel that their manager has time for them and that they're dedicated to them. And managers physically can't do that. So unless they have time given back to them. When I think about that, that is scheduling automation is a big factor to me in meeting employee demands and of course meeting business needs because you can't roll things out that only satisfy employee demands. You have to do things that of course hopefully on the majority satisfy employee demands, as the first priority, and then do have a business like underpinning to them, because then it's just a
Yeah,
responsible
absolutely.
decision.
And as you're talking about this, I'm just thinking about, again, back to bringing the human back to human resources. I
Hmm.
think another demand or wish or hope or prayer or however you want to say it, expectation that employees have is you and I just think I'm like 2 generations older than you or something, but like here's the thing, how can I do better? Like that was, like I want to do better
Hmm.
financially. I want to do better at my job. I want to get ahead. I want to have financial security. I want to buy a house someday. And I think what matches that, like people have a life plan, but most people
Hmm.
get it that like that life plan is going to require a career plan. Those two, it's like,
Hmm.
two uh legs of the ladder, right? You got to have both in place to
Hmm.
get where you
Hmm.
want to go. So I think
Very
like
good point.
career paths or helping people see a better future is also a big part of HR. But I think most of my HR friends, they don't spend a lot of time talking about future and career pathing. They're down in the weeds with payroll and who's upset and who's called somebody a name in the break room or whatever all the stuff is.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the demand that people have for a bigger, better future? You think it's out there still?
Oh, yeah, I do. I think that this is one of the areas in which we have to, as HR people, understand where we've reached our limit, because sometimes we don't have the capacity or the bandwidth to really move the needle. And I think that, fundamentally, career growth is owned by the individual. I really believe that, because even if I think about my own career, I wasn't relying on other people to see me as promotable. I drove myself and I pushed myself, and I partnered with people and I collaborated a lot, and I was like the yes person to get to, all of these different levels of my career. So I think when there's that understanding that 90% of your career development and your growth is on you, and that other 10% is leveraging a resource, whether it's a person, a manager, a tool, like an actual system, whatever that might be, then I think you're kind of set up for a little bit more success. And then, kind of coming back to my initial point, HR teams have to really think about how do they support the career growth that individuals want to have, because even if 90% of it is on the individual, they also believe that 90% of it is what's available to them. So that, it doesn't matter what we know and think that career development is an individual task. There has to be an infrastructure, because otherwise it doesn't really matter if the individual pushes themselves and takes 100% of the ownership for their own development. There has to be infrastructure, there has to be opportunity, there has to be equity, there has to be a plan in place for when someone is promoted, or there has to be like a mentorship program. The infrastructure needs to exist. And if we're talking about a smaller organization, it doesn't have to be this big,
Right, like fancy
heavy lift. It could
university of
just be,
whatever. Right.
yeah, it doesn't have, right. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be, hey, Tracy, I think that this person would be a great mentor for you because they really, really are passionate about strategy, and this is the thing that you wanted to work on, and this is the thing that you wanted to develop. It could be as simple as that. And then saying, can you meet once a month, so and so, with Tracy so she can learn from you? And that does feel good for someone who wants that exposure or wants growth. And then it is kind of this harmonious and cyclical thing where, you extend an olive branch or you do something to support someone's career growth, and then they, give more. They give 5 inches instead of an inch because they want more, they want more exposure, they want to do more. So there's no downside to developing an infrastructure, whether big or small, and there's no downside to helping people or even outsourcing the learning and development portion of the business, because again, I mean, this is where sometimes we in HR are overjobbed. Like that's not necessarily where we're best suited. There are L&D professionals and companies who do this every
Yeah,
single day.
absolutely. But I think, not but, yes, and that's what I want to do. Improv, yes, and.
Yeah, there you go. Yes,
So
and
I do
great.
agree. The
Yes,
career
and.
growth is owned by the individual, 100%. I agree with that. And you do have to leverage it. And people are wired different. Like again, I think that like you and I are cut from the same cloth. Like I got after it really young,
Mhm.
and it's paid off.
Yeah.
That's why I tell young people, get
Mhm.
after it. It'll
Totally.
pay off. I promise. It doesn't look like it in this moment, but someday you're going to know a lot if you learn a lot. That's just how that works. But I
Mhm.
love what
Right,
you
that's
said
true.
about HR can be like a real advocate for infrastructure. I mean, like that's the
Mhm.
conversation.
Mhm.
While we're working with our individuals, our employee demands, we've also got this thing of the business needs. And really, most companies that are growing are going to need future managers, future people who are,
Right.
what are they, specialists in a certain area, right? Like, we're going to need a
Yeah.
specialist. Like, if 20 years ago, we would have been like, social media? What do you mean? you know,
Mhm.
I can remember when
Mhm.
a guy came to,
I
go
know,
ahead,
don't
I'm
even get me
sorry.
started. No, I
Well,
said don't even
I
get me
can
started.
remember I was running an apartment community in uptown Charlotte, North Carolina, and this gentleman came by and talked to me about the internet and wanted to know if we wanted a website. And I said, I don't know. I'm not sure if we want that. I mean,
That's
that's the conversation
hilarious.
I had
And it's so funny because it's such a window into that time too, because now you just
for
go online
everything.
to find to create a website. Yeah, so it's like there isn't someone knocking at your door asking if you want to create a website. You just like create it or you have it. It's just really fun. It's so nostalgic. I love looking
Yeah,
back
and
on stuff like that.
and it was an apartment community, and they're like, because we survived on having a sign out front and a very busy road frontage road, frontage area, and
Mm.
people would come in to look for an
Mhm.
apartment. He's like, but people can look at your apartments on the computer, and we were like, wow, really? You know,
That's
so nifty.
nifty.
But
Actually, it's so true. Like we live in an apartment community because the housing market is insane, and especially in New York, but pretty much everywhere. And everything is online. There's no one to show you the apartment. If you want to see it, you have to come to the leasing office and like just get a key to see a unit that's available to see. And everything else is online. You never even meet with someone. Everything is
oh, I
online.
think
I was
that's
like
terrible. My heart is
mind
grieving
blown.
because I used to
I
be in my
I
2 inch
know.
heels and my pantyhose driving my golf cart around with you on the back end with the twins. I
Oh, I love a
know.
golf cart. Yeah, hey, pick me up
Yeah, but
anytime.
we got to provide the infrastructure was my whole point, right? So
Yes.
we got to have that, and the demands of the employees, we've got to have that growth. I mean, you're not going to grow this business if you don't have
Mhm.
somebody ready. In fact, I had this conversation, had HR, you know how we do. This is how we do, don't we? All HR people
Uh-huh.
listening. She called me up. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I've got a doozy. I need help." I said, "Okay." And so she's got this poor person who cannot stay awake. And so we had a whole conversation.
Oh
And
no.
here's the thing that this is the big nugget that popped in my head this week. I'm going to write an article about it, Tracy. But like, there's the people problem, but then there's the business problem that the people problem is creating. And I think we
Yeah.
sometimes forget that because I kept telling my HR friend, I was like, listen, I'm not really sure what to do with the sleeping part right now. I have to think about that one. But the problem is they don't want to do anything about the sleeping person because he has knowledge that nobody else has. And really the business problem is we don't have anybody ready. You see what I'm saying?
Oy. That's like
Right.
a double
Right.
whammy.
And those are the things we get ourselves in if we don't have the infrastructure or we don't have the career pathing going on. There should be somebody that knows
Yeah.
what Tracy knows in case Tracy goes off and
Yeah.
writes the best-selling novel on Amazon or whatever.
It's true. Yeah, hey, from maybe we'll manifest it. But a great example of this recently is that I was on maternity leave. I was out for almost 5 months, and I really believe that knowledge sharing is power. It doesn't remove the ability that you have to be successful. In fact, it enables people and it empowers people. And I'm on a very small HR team. And so the more knowledge we all have of one another's role and what we do individually, the better we'll be as a team. And subject matter experts are, or SMEs as I like to say, are great. We need subject matter. We are all subject matter experts in HR. However, that doesn't mean that there isn't knowledge sharing, which is a responsibility for all of us. Because then, like, do you really want to be the person that can't take 2 weeks off, or in my case, 5 months off for maternity leave because nobody knows how to do your?
No,
That
you
sounds
need to be with the
miserable.
babies, please.
That's right.
100%. Because they're only going to
That's
be
right.
this
Yeah,
big
and I
one
came back and
time.
guess what? Everything was fine. I know it's true, and now they're so big.
Oh,
They're already 8 months. But yeah, I mean, I came back and guess what? Everything was fine. It's not that big of a deal if something is a little bit different than you do. Who cares? Actually, in any case, when someone does something that you do every single day or every week, every month, every quarter, they might see a better way of doing it. Be open to that.
yeah,
That's my
yeah.
advice.
And what I'm also kind of having an aha about during our conversation, because I love hanging out with Traci Chernoff. Here's the thing, she said we've got HR. You said we have L&D, right? And you
Hmm.
said you can outsource it, you can do whatever, but we need to be an advocate for learning and development. L&D, everybody, learning and development.
Hmm.
But then also there's
Hmm.
kind of this idea of organizational development. So you might need an OD slant on things.
Hmm. Now we're
Yeah,
really
yeah.
talking.
So if
Yeah, it's
HR
true.
people, even if it's just you and your generalist, you and your payroll person, or whatever your situation might be, you're still advocating kind of in the background. I can't do these things because my 40 hours is
Right.
full. But we need to have a strategy in place for organization development, for learning and development. Yeah.
So true. Succession planning, talent planning, that is like the pinnacle of everything. And actually, every HR person, whether they're in payroll or operations or ER, has to be able to think big and think broadly in that way because there is an impact from everyone. And I also think that in some cases you might be that best person. Maybe you're highly strategic and you love being able to think about, the short term and the long term at the same time. And then it's just a matter of planning your backfill because then you have the opportunity to really focus on the organizational development and strategy that really sets businesses apart. Like it when we see all the time businesses go through layoffs of thousands of people. That is most of the time a reflection of poor planning, if anything, not stretching your runway, not being fiscally responsible. And obviously, that's not necessarily on the responsibility of the HR team. This is shared responsibility across the organization. But HR people are partners. We have to partner with the business to really think about, okay, do we need to add 50 people to every department over the course of the year? Or do we think about our development gradually? Do we reserve ourselves in the event of a bad storm or a bad year? I mean, there's so many things that as HR leaders, like, develop in their ability to be strategic, or if someone is not strategic, that they can pass off to someone else who is. These are things that, ultimately have a major impact
Yeah,
on
100%.
organizations.
I just recently spoke at the Lower Cape Fear SHRM here in North Carolina. Yeah,
Love it.
great people over there. It's over on the beach here in North Carolina. And I did strategic planning for human resources. And
Oh.
that's the other thing. Well, you keep saying, HR business partner. That's a very common thing we say in HR. But
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we just have to believe that we're partners. Like, wait, I can share
Yeah.
with you some ideas about how people operations, as you said earlier, needs to be run. And I tell you, if an HR person has a strategic plan, you said if they're a more strategic person, and they walk in and they say to the VPs and all the people in the C-suite, here's what I have planned for the year. What else do I need to plan on? But you are demonstrating, I've got this plan. I mean, it can really up your
Mm-hmm.
game as the partner that the C-suite and the VPs really need. I just think it's essential.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I like that you mentioned demonstrating the behavior because that is so much of what we
100%.
have to do. And, sometimes it's about making small incremental changes rather than massive, mountain moving approaches to change. And it's those incremental changes that really then like build this huge, moment where you look back and you're like, wow, we really made a huge difference in the organization, or we really were able to, ultimately move mountains just by moving these
Yeah,
molehills first. So not to be too, too leaning on the analogies, but it really is true that you can make a lot more of a difference sometimes when you focus on those small
yeah.
behavior changes, which are much, much easier to just do for people
Yeah,
generally.
absolutely. And I don't want to finish our podcast without talking about your podcast because I think your podcast is fantastic. I just
Thank you.
recently listened to a whole episode. Hold on, I'm trying to find it here, which one I listened to. HR strategies for addressing tobacco use in the workplace. Okay, with
Mm. With
oh my
Dr. David
gosh.
Utley,
All
yeah.
right. So this so ironic, but so like timely. So I'm working with an organization right now and pretty new to this organization. And so Tracy, I'm walking in there and everybody's standing outside like this. I mean, like everybody.
Ugh,
And
yeah, yeah.
don't take this as judgment. I'm just saying, I care. See, that's the other thing about
Mhm.
bringing the human back to HR. I really
Yeah.
care about people. I'm like,
Of course you
you need
do.
to stop
Yeah.
smoking. And so, anyway,
Yeah.
everybody is outside on break having a cigarette. And but one of the things that Tracy is doing on a very practical level on her website is talking about these subjects. How do I help people? And so you guys had the best talk. So I took that podcast, I
Thank
passed
you.
it on to this company. You're
Well,
welcome. And I
thank
was
you so
like,
much.
y'all, just listen to this. Let's get Pivot in here and
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, oh,
I
he's
know.
amazing. That Dr. David Utley, he's a medical doctor with the surgical background and then, this really astute focus on what was missing for people in workplaces. It's really amazing. So thank you for mentioning that. I definitely encourage your listeners to take a listen because smoking is a big challenge that employers have and that people
Yeah,
have. It's fundamentally degrading health
yeah,
across
yeah,
the
and
world.
let me get it right here. It is episode 184 on bringing the human back to human resources with Tracy, and it's
Thank
Tracy
you.
with an I. Your mom, she gave you an I.
That's
She's
right.
so good.
That's
I love that about her.
yes, she did. People are like, "Is it with a Y or EY?" I'm like,
That's
"Neither.
right.
It's with
That's
an
right.
I."
I hope that you have benefited from this podcast today, talking with HR guru Traci Chernoff. So, will you tell us how we can find you other than your podcast that I just mentioned? Where else can we find you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me
Yeah,
on. It's
I
been
love your
such a
energy.
blast, and I oh, same, and I'm so excited to have you on my podcast too. So your listeners can catch you there too. But you can find me at hrtracy.com. Again, that's TRACI, and HR Tracy is kind of the name of the game for everything on Instagram, on LinkedIn. That's how you can find me. And I will say also my podcast. I release an episode every week on Tuesdays. So if you would like to connect with me there. Of course, I have Q&As and I have a YouTube, so you can interact there or through Instagram DMs. I like to really engage with listeners, as I know you do as well, because they matter and people matter. So thank you so much
Yeah,
again
yeah.
for
All
this
right, give the
opportunity.
babies a kiss for me. Tell them their Aunt Nicole from
I
Charlotte said
certainly
hello.
will.
That's
Auntie
right.
Nicole. Yes, I
You're
will.
welcome. All
Thank
right,
you so
everybody,
much.
that's been another episode of the Build a Vibrant Culture podcast. Please go down to the comments and leave a little comment, a little love for us, a little feedback. Maybe we need to improve. We're game for that too. And then if you liked it, if you'd give us a thumbs up, we'd really appreciate it. You can check us out over on the Apple, iTunes, and then, of course, on the YouTube. So go all the places and share this with a friend. Thanks so much for listening. Hope you all have a vibrant week.